The sun hung low over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the sprawling fields of Chuck Norris Farm. Birds chirped lazily, and a gentle breeze carried the earthy scent of freshly tilled soil. Everything looked peaceful, almost ordinary. Chuck, dressed in a faded denim shirt and rugged boots, moved calmly among the animals, feeding the chickens and checking the fences. His farm was quiet, serene, a perfect escape from the chaos of the outside world. Nearby, hidden behind the old oak trees lining the edge of the property, a group of gang members whispered urgently. They had been watching the farm for weeks, convinced it was an easy target. "Old man lives here. Nothing valuable. Let's hit it quick," one of them muttered. Excitement and greed sparkled in their eyes. They didn't know who they were dealing with. Chuck paused for a moment, adjusting a hay bale, unaware, or perhaps pretending to be unaware, of the danger lurking just beyond the tree line. His movements were deliberate but relaxed, his calm presence radiating quiet confidence. To any observer, he appeared like any other farmer tending to his land. The gang crept closer, their footsteps careful but hurried, whispering about the plan to take control and intimidate the farm. They imagined an easy payday and a few laughs at the expense of an old man. One of them glanced at the farmhouse and smirked, pointing at Chuck. "See him? That's the guy. He looks harmless. This will be easy." Chuck didn't flinch. He continued his chores with steady precision, feeding the last of the animals and checking the barn doors. Even as he worked, there was a sharpness in his eyes, a subtle awareness of every shadow, every sound. He had faced danger before, countless times. But this was different. This was his home, his sanctuary, and anyone who thought they could take it lightly was about to learn a lesson. The air grew heavier, tension almost palpable, though from Chuck's perspective, it was simply another morning on the farm. Little did the gang know, their day of reckoning was about to begin. Chuck Norris, the legendary Marine sniper, might appear calm, but he was ready. And in mere moments, the ordinary-looking farm would become the stage for an unforgettable showdown. What the gang didn't know would shock them in seconds. The morning sun was now higher, spilling bright light across the farm. Chuck Norris continued his routine, checking the barn and stacking firewood near the farmhouse. To anyone passing by, he was just an ordinary man, tending to his land, enjoying the quiet life. But his calm demeanor masked a lifetime of discipline, survival, and unmatched skill. Unbeknownst to him, or so the gang thought, they had everything under control. The group of 4 men crouched low behind the edge of the oak grove, clutching crowbars and a small stash of firearms. They whispered among themselves, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Old man doesn't know we're here." "Easy job," one of them hissed. "Yeah, we'll hit him fast, grab anything valuable, and be gone before he even knows," another said, smirking. As they approached, the crunch of leaves beneath their boots betrayed their presence. Chuck paused mid-step, sensing the disturbance. Without turning, his hand brushed against the side of his hip, a subtle motion so slight that the gang wouldn't notice. He wasn't panicking. He was calculating. The gang burst from their hiding spot, shouting and waving their weapons. "This is a raid. Nobody move," one yelled. Adrenaline surged through their veins. They believed fear would be enough to break him. But Chuck didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed, and his posture remained calm, steady, almost unnervingly relaxed. The gang moved closer, laughing and taunting. "Old man, hand over whatever you got. Make this easy for yourself." Chuck continued walking slowly toward the barn, his voice calm, measured, yet commanding. "I suggest you leave. You don't want to do this." The gang froze for a split second, surprised by the calm authority in his tone. One of them laughed nervously. "What's he gonna do, hit us with a stick?" The others joined in, underestimating the man before them. Chuck stopped, facing the gang directly. The sunlight glinted off his eyes, revealing a sharp focus honed over decades. "I said leave. This is your only warning," he repeated. One of the gang members, braver or more foolish than the rest, stepped forward, swinging his crowbar. "You talk too much, old man," he shouted. The rest of the gang surged behind him, confident they could intimidate a man who looked harmless. In that moment, the calm was shattered, but only from their perspective. Chuck's movements became a blur, fluid and precise. With the subtle motion of his hand, the first gang member tripped over a cleverly placed wire trap, sent sprawling to the ground. Before anyone could react, Chuck's voice rang out again. "I warned you." The others froze, confusion and fear flickering across their faces. Chuck moved with effortless precision, disabling the next intruder with a swift, non-lethal takedown. His movements were calculated, like a chess master anticipating every move. Each action left the gang stunned, scrambling to recover, unsure how one man could dominate them so easily. By now, some neighbors who were passing by had begun filming the scene on their phones, whispering to each other, "Who is this guy? How is he stopping them so fast?" The gang, realizing they were being watched, grew panicked and desperate. If you were watching this happen live, in which city or country would you be? Comment below. The gang tried regrouping, aiming their weapons, but Chuck remained calm. Every step he took, every small adjustment in his stance, revealed that he was in complete control. The farm itself became a strategic fortress under his command. Gates, fences, and even natural terrain worked in his favor. One of the gang members finally shouted, "He's just one man. Grab him together." But before they could coordinate, Chuck moved again with pinpoint accuracy, neutralizing their coordinated efforts. The gang was no longer laughing. Panic was setting in. Chuck's eyes scanned the group, each movement deliberate. "This is your last chance," he said calmly, his voice carrying the weight of authority and experience. The gang hesitated. They had underestimated him completely. The farm, once peaceful and serene, had turned into a battlefield, but it was a battlefield on Chuck's terms. He didn't need to shout, and he didn't need to overexert. His calm presence, strategic thinking, and legendary skill as a Marine sniper had already given him the advantage. Every intruder's move was anticipated, every escape route covered. The neighbors filming could hardly believe their eyes. One whispered into the camera, "Is this real? How is one man stopping for armed raiders?" The gang, now disoriented, had no idea what they were facing. Chuck's calm confidence was more intimidating than their weapons. By the end of the first few minutes of the raid, the gang realized something terrifying. They were not dealing with an ordinary man. The farm was Chuck Norris' domain, and he was about to show them why they should never have underestimated him. Will the gang escape, or are they about to face the full force of Chuck Norris' legendary skills? The gang stumbled back, scrambling to regain their balance after Chuck's first precise moves. Panic was starting to creep in, but their bravado remained, at least on the surface. One of the younger members laughed nervously, trying to save face. "Old man, you think you can stop us?" he sneered. "We've got weapons, and you've got what? A farm stick." Chuck didn't respond with anger. He simply tilted his head, assessing each intruder, his gaze calm but piercing. "Weapons or not," he said evenly, "you've made a mistake coming here." The gang laughed again, mocking him openly, convinced their numbers gave them the advantage. They had no idea they were facing a man who had once operated as a legendary Marine sniper, someone trained to anticipate danger, read intentions, and react with deadly precision. Chuck's calm presence alone was unsettling. Every muscle in his body seemed relaxed yet coiled, ready to strike. He moved slowly toward the barn, his steps deliberate, drawing the gang's attention. "We'll see how far your arrogance takes you," he said softly. One of the gang members raised his firearm, aiming it shakily at Chuck. "Try anything, old man, and wheel." The sentence cut off abruptly as Chuck moved with fluid precision. In a single motion, he kicked a nearby wooden post, sending it crashing into a makeshift trap he had set earlier. It snapped taut wires across the path, tripping two of the gang members. They went down hard, yelping in shock. The remaining gang members froze for a moment, fear flickering across their faces. This was not the reaction they expected from an old man they thought they could intimidate. Chuck remained calm, almost serene, as though he were simply correcting a minor inconvenience. From the edge of the property, a few neighbors had begun filming on their phones, whispering in disbelief. "Who is this guy?" one muttered. "He's not even breaking a sweat." Another added, "I can't believe how calmly he's handling this." If you were witnessing this raid in real life, what would you do? Would you run, hide, or stand your ground like Chuck? Comment below. The gang tried regrouping, shouting and waving their weapons, thinking intimidation could still work. "He's just one guy. Take him together," one yelled. But Chuck didn't need to rush. Every movement of the gang was anticipated. Their gestures, their panic, their overconfidence, He read it all. Chuck moved closer, his eyes scanning the terrain. The barn, the fences, even the scattered tools on the ground became part of his strategy. He didn't need brute force. His precision and calm made him lethal without appearing threatening. "Move another step, and you'll regret it," he said, his voice steady and unwavering. One of the gang members, emboldened by his own arrogance, stepped forward with a crowbar raised. Chuck simply sidestepped, using the intruder's momentum against him. The man fell to the ground with a heavy thud, groaning, while Chuck kept his eyes on the remaining gang. The leader of the gang, realizing things were slipping out of control, barked orders, trying to regain dominance. "Surround him. Don't let him escape." But Chuck anticipated this too. With a few precise actions, he created distance, forcing the gang into clumsy, uncoordinated movements. Each of their attempts to intimidate him only highlighted their lack of skill. Chuck's movements were not rushed or chaotic. They were calculated, calm, and devastatingly effective. Every step, every subtle motion, made it clear that he was in complete control. The gang's confidence began to waver, replaced by fear and confusion. One member whispered frantically to another, "This isn't an old man. He's something else." The others glanced at each other, doubt creeping in. The realization was sinking in too late. They had underestimated Chuck Norris completely. Chuck paused, giving them a moment to reconsider. "This is your last warning," he said quietly, but the weight behind his words carried more force than any shout could. His calm demeanor was terrifying in its own right. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to rage. The farm, his domain, was a fortress, and he was the master. By now, the gang was beginning to panic. Their movements were uncoordinated, their nerves fraying. The balance of power had shifted, and the old man they mocked was now clearly the dominant force. The sun reflected off Chuck's eyes, the calm storm before the inevitable strike. The gang had made their choice. They had walked into the wrong farm, the wrong house, and the wrong man. Will the gang finally realize who they're up against? Or will Chuck continue to dismantle them quietly and efficiently? The farm was no longer quiet. The rustle of leaves, the snapping of traps, and the shocked yells of the gang filled the air. Chuck Norris moved deliberately among them, each step precise, calculated. His eyes scanned the attackers, anticipating their next moves. The gang, once full of bravado, now stumbled and hesitated, uncertain how to respond to a man who appeared almost untouchable. One of the gang members, tall, wiry, with a scar running down his cheek, finally paused mid-step. His eyes widened as he caught a glimpse of Chuck's movements. "Wait, he's too fast, too precise," he muttered under his breath. The others, still in shock, looked at him, seeking guidance. But guidance was useless. Their leader's commands now rang hollow in the presence of sheer skill and focus. Chuck moved silently toward a fallen crowbar, picking it up with a casual grace. With a swift motion, he swung it just enough to disarm the nearest intruder without causing permanent injury. The man fell backward, groaning, and scrambled to regain his footing. The rest of the gang froze, now realizing that this was no ordinary farmer. They had walked straight into a predator's domain. Who is he?" whispered one gang member, finally questioning the reality in front of him. "I thought he was just some old guy." Chuck's eyes narrowed, but his expression remained calm. He didn't need to answer. They were about to find out. Every muscle in his body coiled, ready, as though preparing for a storm. A few of the intruders exchanged panicked glances, beginning to understand that brute force would not win this encounter. The leader of the gang, attempting to regain control, barked orders again. "All of you attack together. Don't let him move." But their coordination had dissolved. Panic had set in, and fear clouded their judgment. They hesitated, unsure how to approach a man who moved like a shadow, striking without haste, without sound, without mercy. Chuck took advantage of their hesitation. He sidestepped a poorly aimed swing from one gang member, using the man's momentum to throw him against a fence. Another intruder tried to lunge with a knife, only to be met by a precise, controlled strike that sent him sprawling. Each move Chuck made was deliberate and efficient, demonstrating years of training and experience. From the edge of the property, a neighbor, still filming on their phone, whispered to themselves, "I've seen videos of Chuck Norris, but this is insane." The realization spread through the small crowd. What they were witnessing was not just a defensive reaction. It was the calculated execution of someone who had survived wars, missions, and situations far deadlier than this point. One of the gang members finally whispered to the others, trembling, He's a Marine. I think he's a sniper. He's trained. We've made a huge mistake." The others looked at each other, dread etched on their faces. Their confidence had evaporated entirely. Chuck didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His calm demeanor and measured actions spoke volumes. He moved toward the center of the farm, guiding the gang into a controlled space where each of his previous movements had prepared the battlefield in his favor. The barn doors, the fences, even the scattered farm tools, all were part of his strategy. The leader tried one last desperate move, rushing toward Chuck with a firearm. Chuck's eyes followed him, calm, calculating. With a subtle shift of weight and a precise motion, the intruder was disarmed and sent tumbling to the ground, leaving him dazed and humiliated. The remaining gang members froze completely, their morale shattered. Chuck's calm voice echoed across the farm, firm but measured. "I told you. This was your only warning." Every word carried weight, authority, and experience. The gang now understood that they were not facing an ordinary man. They were facing a legend, a man whose life had been forged in the crucible of battle, whose precision and skill were unmatched. The sun glinted off his eyes as he scanned the last few intruders. Fear had replaced their arrogance, and hesitation had replaced their confidence. Chuck's mastery of the farm, combined with his combat experience, left them utterly powerless. If you were watching this live, would you still try to fight, or would you surrender immediately? Comment below what you would do. As Chuck continued to move methodically, taking control of the farm and neutralizing threats, one thing became clear. The gang had underestimated him at their own peril. Every movement, every reaction, every calm but precise strike reinforced one undeniable truth. They had walked into the wrong farm, at the wrong time, and against the wrong man. The farm, once serene and peaceful, had transformed into a stage showcasing Chuck Norris' skill, discipline, and lethal efficiency. The gang's mistakes had made them easy targets, and Chuck's expertise ensured that none of them could recover. Their fear was palpable, their regret immediate. And still, Chuck didn't gloat. He simply prepared for the next move, ready to finish the encounter with the same calm, controlled precision that had already left the gang reeling. Will Chuck finally reveal the full extent of his legendary Marine sniper skills, or will the gang find a way to escape? The farm had become a chessboard, and Chuck Norris was the grandmaster. Every fence post, every barn door, every scattered tool was part of his carefully orchestrated battlefield. The gang, still reeling from his earlier precision strikes, tried desperately to regroup, but panic and fear had already broken their coordination. Chuck's eyes scanned the group, noting each member's position, stance, and intention. He didn't move hastily. Every motion was calculated. He could see the weakness in their formation, the overconfidence that had led them here, and the exact moment each of them would make a fatal mistake if they continued. The leader barked out commands, but his voice no longer carried authority. "Move. Don't let him." But before he could finish, Chuck had already anticipated their movement. A single swift motion sent the leader sprawling backward over a stack of hay bales, leaving him stunned. The other gang members froze, horror in their eyes as the reality of Chuck's skill settled in. Chuck's voice cut through the tension, calm and commanding. "I warned you. This is your final chance." It wasn't just a warning, it was a statement of fact. The gang realized they were completely outmatched, yet desperation made them reckless. One of the younger members raised a pistol, trembling in his hand. I can still." He didn't finish. Chuck's reaction was almost imperceptible, a subtle shift of weight, a flick of his wrist, and the pistol flew from his hands, landing harmlessly several feet away. The man fell to his knees, eyes wide with disbelief. Chuck moved methodically, each strike precise. He disarmed, incapacitated, and controlled the gang without ever raising his voice in anger, without a single wasted movement. His Marine sniper training shone through: awareness, patience, anticipation, and precision. Every action was measured, every response calculated. The barn doors, once ordinary, became a tactical asset. Chuck guided a gang member into a corner, using the door as cover while neutralizing another intruder with a swift, non-lethal strike. The gang's attempts at intimidation had dissolved into chaos. Their confidence was gone, replaced by fear, awe, and the harsh realization that they were dealing with someone far beyond their reckoning. From the edge of the farm, neighbors and a few brave onlookers filmed the encounter, whispering in disbelief. "Is this real?" one asked. He's unstoppable." Another added, "This isn't just skill. This is legendary." Chuck didn't need their praise. His focus remained entirely on the gang, and the calculated dismantling of their threats continued. The leader attempted one last desperate move, lunging at Chuck with a crowbar. In a blur of motion, Chuck sidestepped, redirecting the man's momentum so that he slammed harmlessly into a stack of firewood. The rest of the gang hesitated, fear making them immobile. They had underestimated one man, an ordinary-looking man with extraordinary skill, and now they were paying the price. Chuck's calm voice rang out again, steady and authoritative. "Leave now. Walk away while you still can." The gang knew, without a doubt, that defiance would result in further humiliation or worse. They had learned the hard way that brute force alone could not overcome decades of discipline, training, and precision. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to overexert. The presence of a legend, the aura of a man who had survived countless battles as a Marine sniper, was enough to control the situation. Every strike, every movement, was deliberate. No unnecessary force was used. Every action was calculated to maintain control while minimizing harm. One gang member finally whispered, trembling, We underestimated him. He's a Marine, a sniper. He's unbeatable." The words hung in the air like a confession, a recognition of the reality they faced. Chuck paused, letting his words and presence do what weapons could not. The gang, now fully subdued and disoriented, realized that every second spent underestimating him had been a mistake. Their arrogance had been their downfall. That if you were witnessing this, could you even imagine facing someone like Chuck Norris? Comment below your reaction. With the gang now clearly aware of their helplessness, Chuck made a final, subtle sweep of the farm, ensuring that all threats were neutralized without causing permanent harm. He stood in the center of his domain, calm and unshaken, surveying the fallen intruders. The lesson was clear. The farm was his territory, and no one could violate it without consequence. The sun reflected off his eyes, his calm aura almost terrifying. The gang had walked into the wrong farm, against the wrong man, and had learned the full weight of his legendary skill. The quiet before the storm had ended, and the storm itself had already passed. Will the gang try to flee, or will Chuck ensure that they face the full consequences of their raid? The tables are about to turn completely. The air over the farm was thick with tension. Dust swirled from the scuffle, the broken fences, and overturned farm tools, creating an almost cinematic battlefield. Chuck Norris stood calmly in the center of it all, surveying the gang that had foolishly tried to invade his sanctuary. They were no longer laughing, no longer shouting. Their confidence had evaporated, replaced entirely by fear and disbelief. One of the gang members, shaking and pale, whispered to another, We have to get out of here. This guy, he's not normal. He's a Marine sniper." The words barely left his lips before Chuck's voice rang out, calm but commanding. "You made your choice when you stepped onto this farm. Now face the consequences." The leader tried to bark orders, attempting to regain some shred of authority. "Get up. Don't let him." But Chuck had already anticipated the move. With a swift, controlled motion, he disarmed the leader, knocking the weapon harmlessly out of reach. The leader stumbled backward, tripping over a strategically placed bundle of hay. It wasn't brute strength, it was precision. Chuck didn't need to shout, and he didn't need to rage. His presence alone was a force of authority. Every move he made, every shift of weight, every subtle stance reflected decades of training, discipline, and lethal skill honed as a legendary Marine sniper. He had faced far deadlier situations, and this gang of intruders was child's play in comparison. From the edge of the property, neighbors continued filming, some whispering in disbelief. "Is this for real? How is one man stopping all of them?" someone muttered. Others nodded, their phones trembling in their hands as they captured each calculated move Chuck made. The story was unfolding like a live-action legend, and everyone witnessing it understood that they were seeing a master at work. The remaining gang members were now frozen, unsure whether to fight or flee. Fear had replaced their arrogance, and panic clouded their judgment. Chuck's calm and deliberate movements amplified the terror. He didn't need to overexert. His control of the situation was absolute. If you were here, would you run, surrender, or try to fight Chuck Norris? Comment below what you would do. Chuck began systematically neutralizing the threats, using the environment to his advantage. A barn door swung open to reveal a ladder, which he subtly nudged, sending one intruder sprawling harmlessly to the ground. A loose rope trap he had set earlier snared another, immobilizing him without harm. Each action was calculated, non-lethal, and devastatingly effective. The gang's leader finally glanced around, eyes wide with realization. He's not just a farmer. He's trained, tactical, a sniper, he gasped. It wasn't a guess, it was obvious now. Chuck's precision, his calm assessment, and the way he anticipated every move confirmed what they had feared. They had crossed someone whose skill was legendary. Chuck didn't gloat or taunt. He simply moved with deliberate control, ensuring the gang had no chance to recover. One by one, he guided them toward the edge of the property, giving them the opportunity to leave without permanent injury. But every step of the way, it was clear, they had been utterly outmatched. Finally, the last intruder hesitated near the gate, his hands trembling. Chuck approached slowly, his eyes unwavering. "Leave. Now," he said simply. The man didn't argue. He knew there was nothing left to fight for. The lesson had been learned. The neighbors, who had been recording the encounter, were now cheering softly. Some clapped. Others gasped. Every witness understood that Chuck Norris had not only defended his property, but had done so with unparalleled skill and discipline. The farm, once serene, had become the stage for a masterclass in precision, control, and strategic thinking. Chuck glanced over the subdued gang one last time. He spoke firmly but without anger. "Respect this land. Respect the rules. And never underestimate anyone based on appearances." In that moment, the full truth of Chuck's past became clear to everyone who had watched. This wasn't just a man defending his farm. This was a legendary Marine sniper, a warrior whose calm and calculated methods were forged in decades of experience. The intruders had been humbled. The neighborhood had witnessed a modern legend in action, and Chuck had maintained his trademark restraint and honor throughout. The gang has been defeated, but what happens after the raid goes viral? How will Chuck's legend grow, and what lessons will the world learn from his calm and unstoppable presence? By the time the dust settled, Chuck Norris stood alone in the center of his farm, calm and composed as if nothing had happened. The gang, fully subdued and utterly humiliated, had fled or surrendered, their bravado shattered. The farm, once serene and quiet, had transformed into a testament to the power of skill, discipline, and respect. Chuck's presence, even in stillness, radiated authority, the kind only someone with decades of military precision could carry. Neighbors, who had been filming the encounter on their phones, began uploading the videos online. Within hours, social media lit up. Clips of Chuck moving with surgical precision, neutralizing threats without a single wasted motion, went viral. Comments flooded in from around the world. Awe, disbelief, and admiration for a man who had defended his home with calm dignity. "Legendary," one comment read. "No way one man did this," wrote another. "Marine sniper confirmed." "Respect." The news picked up the story as well. Local stations interviewed witnesses, and each retelling emphasized Chuck's discipline and restraint. The gang, meanwhile, faced immediate consequences. Law enforcement arrived at the scene, and once they saw the video evidence, it became clear that the intruders had been reckless and completely outmatched. Charges were filed, and the story of their failed raid spread nationwide. Yet Chuck didn't gloat. He walked among the animals, feeding the chickens and checking the fences as if the raid had never happened. To him, defending his home was not about pride, it was about principle. His calm, strategic response had protected lives, property, and integrity. Every action he had taken demonstrated that true strength was measured not by violence or anger, but by precision, control, and honor. The world began to recognize him not just as a martial arts legend, but as a man whose presence alone commanded respect. Social media exploded with clips of his calm efficiency, and hashtags began trending. Hashtag Chuck Norris, Hashtag legendary sniper. Hashtag farm defense. Hashtag respect. Memes, articles, and discussions about the incident spread like wildfire. Even people who had never seen Chuck in action found themselves in awe of his skill and restraint. If you had been on this farm, witnessing Chuck defend his home, what would have been your reaction? Type it in the comments below. The gang, now facing not only legal repercussions but worldwide ridicule, had learned a hard lesson. Never underestimate someone based on age or appearance. Chuck's actions were not about revenge or showing off. They were about protecting what mattered while staying true to his values. He had won the encounter without compromising his integrity, proving that wisdom and skill often outweigh sheer force. Across the globe, viewers began to internalize the message. Chuck's response was a reminder that calm, focused action in the face of chaos is far more powerful than anger or reckless aggression. The incident became more than just a viral video. It became a lesson in humility, respect, and the consequences of underestimating others. Chuck looked out over his land, the sun casting long shadows across the farm. Everything was back in order, peaceful once more. The legend of Chuck Norris had grown even larger, not because of fear he instilled, but because of the respect he commanded through discipline, calm, and unwavering skill. If you believe no one should be judged by appearances, type respect in the comments. Subscribe for more inspiring stories where courage, skill, and integrity triumph. The story of that day would travel far beyond the boundaries of the farm. Videos, news stories, and social media posts ensured that the world would remember not just the failed gang raid, but the extraordinary man who turned what could have been a tragedy into a display of precision, wisdom, and legendary calm. Chuck Norris had defended his home, humbled the intruders, and reminded the world why his reputation as a living legend is well-earned. Even in quiet moments, tending his animals or repairing a fence, the aura of that day lingered. It was a story that would be retold for years, inspiring anyone who heard it to value skill, patience, and integrity over chaos and brute force. The farm was peaceful again. The gang had fled. The world had watched. And Chuck Norris, calm, composed, unstoppable, had once again proven that legends are not made by brute force, but by discipline, courage, and respect.